Now, with us, we planted quite a number of churches in those very early days around this country, different ones. We had one group of lovely people down in Tasmania who had been a commune with the Guru Maharaji Ji, the guy they used to call a little fat guru. He's now actually a Christian evangelist of all things, but the little fat guru, the Guru Maharaji Ji, he had a commune down in the south of Tasmania, and they had this strange experience where somehow either like a Jesus movement, they were suddenly hit by a spiritual movement that scared the wits out of half the commune, and they ran away, I think, and the other half went on to form a little community in a place called Garden Island Creek. And I used to go down there and teach them the scriptures and help them establish that church. And then we had another one in Brisbane, in one of the poorest suburbs, where a lot of single mums and other poorer people used to gather together. So we established a number of little communities, and one that exists to this day, which is called St Martin's Community Church, that is in the centre of Melbourne. Well, currently we're in a situation where, in one sense, we're going back to the future. Some of our God Squad people probably only remember our days working in the bike scene, and maybe don't have a full sense of those early days when the community of faith, the itinerant preaching, and God Squad were really one solid movement together. And we feel that, some of us, that God is calling us back into that kind of approach. Now that brings me to an introduction to something that really I've prepared this for. And that is that we now have a number of new communities of faith with unusual and different names. The brother who we really feel God brought to us to raise up God Squad in the European sector and in the UK, Sean Stillman. Sean and a friend Howie together had both been involved in Christian Motorcycle Association, but they both had a longing for something more than just the bike scene, though they wanted to make sure that they worked in the really tough end of the bike scene and not just in the sort of middle class road bike scene. And Sean used to meet with me at a festival in England called Greenbelt. And Greenbelt was a very large festival with tens of thousands of young people. It was actually formed initially through ministry of some hippies from the United States, went over to England and really launched it. But it was an arts festival. So to make a long story short, I became involved in going and speaking every other year, as it were, at this arts festival, and not only speaking at it, but also I got involved in the European Christian artists who were in Holland, and also made visits to other arts festivals, like one that they had in Finland, for instance. And during that time, I developed a ministry where we would look at the performing arts, music. God opened up doors for a relationship with Bono and U2 and other artists around the world. And we became really interested in looking at the way in which music, right down through history, had had an enormous impact on social justice, on community, on trying to renew the shape of the culture, all of that stuff. Well, part of that then brought Sean Stillman into that artistic world as well. And eventually Sean decided to start a community of faith down in Wales. And that community of faith, he wanted to get a kind of a name that would express something fresh, a new kind of expression. And so he called his community in Wales Zach's Place, which was named after the story of Zacchaeus in the Bible, in which case you weren't talking about a poor man, you were talking about a very rich man, but someone who was still marginalised. Because one of the things about our community at the start was that we recognised the church had become so middle class and entrenched, and there were so many different groups of people who were marginalised from the institutional church, but they were still looking for community, still looking for hope, still looking for a spiritual message. So that really concerned us. And at the very beginning, we didn't say we were only there to help the homeless, which we were, but we weren't only there to help the homeless or the poor or the rejected. We were also there to reach those who were marginalised from other subcultural groups. So when we began, of course, the people that were anti-war, anti-Vietnam War, became people we were really wanting to mix with, because they saw Jesus as a person that preached peace, and that really moved us. And then we were interested in the artists, because most musos and most visual artists and performing artists didn't see the Christian church as a friend. They saw the church as a critic, really, of whatever they were doing. As well as that, there were other marginal groups, political groups, radical groups that didn't like the mainstream politics. And of course we didn't either. We felt that mainstream politics had really missed it out altogether. And then in the schools, of course, young people didn't feel that the educational systems and political systems were reaching where they were in need either. So right from the start, we weren't just bikers. We were interested in all those subcultural groups that were marginalised by the church, and we began to reach out to them. Massive work in schools. In fact, I think I'd go so far as to say it's a lesser known fact that probably our work with hundreds of thousands of high school students over the last 50 years may have been the most significant work we did. That's not to take away from working with the outlaws, but I do believe our work in schools has been the most significant work we've done in this nation over those years. Well, Sean set up his new community of faith, and he called it a ragamuffin church, which is a kind of a cute name that most people in the English language would understand. And Zach's place has become a centre for performing arts, a place where they have all sorts of musicians coming and performing, where they have plays and other presentations in the arts field. It's also a place where the homeless and the poor are fed, and it's a place where they've created all sorts of fascinating icons. And Sean now has become quite well known for several things. Number one, that he took up our approach to going into pubs and places where normally you would not see preachers. And he's developed a very good style in presenting the story of Jesus at the bar of a pub, which is something that we've done a lot of over the years. As well as that, our friend Howie in Manchester decided to start a Bible study in his garage. And he had a whole bunch of old motorcycle parts and motorcycles he was working on and so on. And before long, that became quite a packed out little Bible study. So he wanted to make something out of that, and he decided to call that one God's Garage. And just to make a long story short, we now have several Zach's places, God's Garages, and other places with sort of creative different names. And one of the things we've sought to do over the years is not to replicate with the same name or the same style. For instance, you won't see the arts to the same extent in God's Garage as you do in Zach's place. And certain elements of care for the poor and the marginalised, the homeless, those that need food and so on, you might find more in one of our communities of faith than in another. And rather trying to make cookie cut copies, we've tried to allow each one of these new communities of faith to grow out of their local culture in a way that truly expresses both its life and also the needs of the community around about it.